This is the Troutbitten Podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout.
This is Troutbitten.
This is the Troutbitten Podcast, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Dominic Swantowski, and I'm the owner of Troutbitten and the author of Troutbitten.com. All right, we're getting back to some streamer talk in this episode, because I know we all love fishing the long flies when given the chance. Day to day, many of us fish streamers off and on, and we're always kind of looking for that next great streamer bite. So the longer we toss around streamers, the more we realize that it's the most subtle changes in presentation that make a difference. Faster or slower? Sure. But how about letting the fly free fall in the current? What about a slight cross lead before reestablishing a strike zone path in just one seam? Or let's try sliding a streamer off the bank with a broadside look, because that often draws a strike when nothing else does. I think most anglers start fishing streamers by casting and stripping, keeping it simple at first. And that works. But as time goes by, we realize how much control we truly have over the streamer. And we learn that making it dance, making it swoon or dart can bring trout charging and crashing into the fly. And those are fun times. But understand this, what we do with the streamer, the motions we give it, and the manipulations we perform with the rod or the line start with the head of the streamer. That's what we're moving, the head of the streamer. I fished for decades without thinking much about this myself. But trout care about the head position of a streamer. They recognize the head, and they feed in a way that is different from nymphs, wets, or dry flies. The other fly styles are too small for a trout to care about where the head is, but there is no doubt that trout are keenly aware of the head of a bait fish. That is their target. And while chasing a moving food form, trout absolutely recognize where the head is and where that food form is going next. So as streamer fishermen, we should consider the head as well, because all of our animations to the fly start there. It's our attachment point to the fly. And what we do with the rod or the line hand directly affects the head of the streamer first. It's how we bring the fly to life. So tonight, we'll talk about the head orientation of the streamer in the water, how the streamer moves with the currents or against them, and what looks more natural versus what might look more attractive. We'll also dig into what added weight does to the head of a streamer, how that affects the action, and how that limits or enhances the presentation styles that we have available. All right, this is going to be a good one, and we're all looking forward to it, I think. But first, let me introduce the Troutbitten crew and have everyone answer just a quick question. All right, let's keep it short. I don't need to know too much from you guys, but hey, what's your favorite species to fish besides trout? Austin, ready, go. Austin Dando.
Probably smallmouth bass. That's what I grew up fishing for, from some of the first species I caught on the fly.
What's the biggest smallmouth you ever caught?
Right around 20 inches here, actually.
You go in inches still. When I talk to smallmouth guys, they talk in pounds.
I don't know anything about pounds.
Me neither. Right?
People ask, and I always answer wrong.
Yeah.
What'd you say it was 21?
No, it was 20.
See, you're exaggerating, 20. Bill.
20 is about a 5-pounder.
There you go.
Give or take 3 or 4 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah, you know.
You should
Pounds
see
of 10.
Steve Sawyer. You guys know Steve Sawyer. He fishes Lake Erie. Oh my gosh. The smallmouth there, they're just unreal.
Yeah.
Steve Sawyer, our buddy, he's like the OG, one of the OG Troutbitten guys. And I was texting with him tonight. For like 2 or 3 years running, he had the biggest smallmouth in Pennsylvania.
Wow.
According to the Fish Commission. You know, they kind of keep records of it. You submit them. All right, Bill, what's your favorite, bud? Anything different?
Musky.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Do they have a scent?
Yeah.
What do they smell like? Fear.
Nastiness.
Nastiness?
I don't know. They've got like this, they're very, very slimy fish, and they have definitely a different aroma to them than any other fish. They're if you think a rainbow trout is slimy and smells fishy, you can like multiply that by 5, and it's about the musky slime and smell you get out of it.
Okay, so it's still fishy, but it's just real strong?
Yeah.
I've never caught a muskie. So I don't know.
We can work on that if you want.
I don't really care. This is not musky bitten. No, I don't know. I know I disappoint Pat, our buddy Pat Burke, when I say I don't really care about muskie, but I don't. I don't. I just the smallmouth I like. That's my second favorite.
But you've never had a muskie eat at your feet.
Understood.
And I think it would change your opinion.
It might. But here's my thing real quick on the muskie. If it takes, it's a fish of 10,000 casts, right?
Yeah.
Do they say 10,000 or 1,000? Is it?
I think they say 10,000.
I think they say 10,000
If you go out with the right guys, it might not be the case.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But if it's a fish of even 5,000 casts, or let's even say 1,000 casts, what have I learned in 1,000 casts? Well, I finally get that basically like a lucky hit. That's what I tell Pat that too. I'm like, how many hits did you get? How many fish? Well, I didn't catch any, but I got two of them chase a black streamer. I'm like, you don't know anything. You don't know anything.
That's like saying you don't know anything because you didn't get a deer yet.
See, I'm not commenting on the hunting game. Trevor?
Right, but...
Josh?
Yeah.
You learn a lot when you're not successful.
Josh learned a lot last night.
I learned a lot last night.
Oh, yeah, Josh. Go ahead.
Yeah,
this isn't about fish. This is't about fish, but you
sure,
told me this morning. Go ahead.
Yep. So here in Pennsylvania, we're kind of in peak rut right now.
Yeah.
And I had a really good opportunity at what would have been my best buck to date, and he never gave me a clear shot. And I'm not sure, I may have made some mistakes in terms of my aggression in calling to him and such, but I think I could have done some things differently that maybe would have got the job done. But it didn't happen, and I learned a lot.
You also learned that he's there.
I learned that he's there. That's big time.
That's
but
big.
We've got my hopes are not high if I don't catch a glimpse of him in the next week, because our archery season ends on the 18th, and then the Orange Army enters the woods, and my chances rapidly deteriorate.
Somebody will pop him.
Or he'll just go nocturnal.
Does that happen?
Oh yeah, pressure hits, and they'll stop making a lot of daytime movement.
Even during the rut?
Well, rut's going to wind down here soon.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
That shows you. I don't know anything about hunting, do I, guys?
No.
Yeah.
Squirrels.
In terms of peak rut for this first round. Now there'll be a second and a third rut that'll be a little bit less apparent, but in terms of peak rut, we've only got maybe 5 more days or so.
Oh, no kidding. So the rifle season starts after the peak rut, as you're calling it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No kidding.
Although it may be a weird year because rut seemed to begin a little later this year. The weather was a little warmer. Sign was a little bit delayed. I don't know. We'll see what it does.
Sign, he says.
There seems to be a lot of research that says rut is the exact same time every year, and it's just activity that we see a difference in. So that meant that rut started at the same time, but it was likely nocturnal.
So the only thing that is the same every year is the light conditions. You think that's it?
Yeah.
I mean, the weather changes.
I don't know. Yeah. I think
Makes sense.
I think it's just hardwired into them.
Josh, what's your favorite species besides trout?
Largemouth bass.
Largemouth.
That's what I grew up fishing.
There's a Missouri boy. Illinois, right?
Illinois, yeah. So we had, I think maybe we've talked about that before. We had a pond in our backyard. That's where I grew up. Austin and I have done some largemouth fishing together. Good bit of it actually back in school.
Oh yeah. Under the cover of darkness.
Under the cover of darkness on illegal ground.
Little golfing. Little golf grounds.
What are you talking about?
Golf ponds. Golf ponds.
We don't speak of such things.
It wasn't a country club, was it?
Do you remember that time that we had a bunch of naked people show up while we were fishing at night?
Hey now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I used to skinny dip in ponds around
Trevor
State College.
What are we doing?
Turned out to be the club cross country team.
It was. Yeah.
Their annual.
We learned
ritual.
about that later. The club cross country team would go skinny dipping in the golf course ponds, and Austin and I happened to be there one night when that was happening.
Is this
we were
co-ed?
fishing?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's this rumbling sound coming from behind the hill, and all of a sudden this like stampede of glow in the dark paint and glow in the dark sticks
glow sticks
came upon us and hid behind some trees, and they started sprinting around and jumping into the pond. And then I remember one time this one kid started circling around me because he didn't know I was hidden behind the tree, and then he saw me and he flipped out and ran away and jumped into the pond. Like I was the weird one.
Yeah, really.
What are you doing here?
What are you doing here with clothes on?
Yeah.
Trevor, you haven't gone yet. Trevor Smith, Dr. Wool.
The one and only.
What's the best species besides trout?
I'm definitely smallmouth. Yeah.
We're all on
I grew up
smallmouth
fishing
except
for
for Billy.
smallmouths. Yeah. Allegheny River is where I grew up fishing.
Oh, yeah.
And they've got a lot of species, but smallmouth were the fun one to catch. Usually rapalas and meps. And I just wade fished and fished from the banks. I never had a boat. It was for the rich kids. So I just explored the river and caught smallmouth. I would catch an occasional walleye. I did catch a small muskie once. I caught a bunch of carp, some channel catfish. Channel catfish and the carp were crazy because there's some huge ones up there. Usually if I was fishing for channel catfish, I'd make up like some dough with some anise in it or vanilla or something like that. And those things would almost pull the rod out of your hand. They're huge. Huge, huge, huge.
Trevor's dirty, isn't he? Right, guys?
I grew up fishing, yeah. I grew up fishing like that around here.
I like that. I would almost say catfish because I like eating catfish.
Yeah.
I've only ever caught a couple catfish, and the only catfish I've ever eaten have been from the store somewhere. Isn't that sad? You need to take me out, man. You take me out and go catfish fishing.
There's some lakes by you that are good for it.
Mm-hmm. Now, hey, I want to address this because Trevor said, what'd you say, Rapala or Rapala? Which did you say?
Rapala.
Which is it?
Rapala.
I say Rapala.
Rapala.
It's
No.
Rapala
No.
for sure.
Rapala.
I'm on Rapala.
Rapala for sure.
If you've ever spoken a language fluently, it's Rapala.
If you've ever spoken a language fluently.
Which excludes you, Bill.
Obviously.
So
That's right.
And so it's come to this.
I'm not here for my language. I'm here for my fishing.
So there's got to be a right and wrong. Seriously, somebody needs to look it up. It's got to be. I mean, come on. Whoever owns Rapala/Rapala,
We don't have to
it's
look
one or
that
the
up.
other. It's one or the other. I'm just
I feel
saying.
like there was a commercial
I hear
at one point that said Rapala.
I
Can't be.
I feel like I always grew up here in Rapala. Anyway, maybe by the end of the episode, somebody looks it up and
I'll
finds
find
out
it here.
that the actual Rapala people say it's one way or the other. Maybe it's somebody's last name. And mine's not Swentiowski, it's Swentowski.
there's YouTube videos about this.
Yeah. I'm going to...
All right, so
cow.
while you guys get going.
I think Bill might be right, actually.
All right, so we skipped the listener questions last week to fit in a few more stories. But let's get back to the questions. Austin, will you read this one, please?
All right, so here's a question from Louis Marshall in London, Ontario. Dom and podcast crew, thank you for what you do. I love listening to each of these episodes because your conversations bring me back to my time in the States. I'm a Canadian resident now, but I was born in Maryland and lived there until I got married. I still fish around here. It's similar but different too. I do take a lot of cues from the things you write about on the website. I'd like to know if you all use the same confidence flies, no matter where you fish for trout. I have a friend who insists that his flies will work everywhere. But I feel that it's best to check with a local fly shop to learn what fly patterns are specialized to that area. What do you guys think? Thanks again for all the time you put in. Thanks, Louie.
I definitely start with my confidence patterns. If I'm in a new area fishing, I don't go to the fly shop first and find out what they suggest. But I do think there's a place for local knowledge, and whether that be a friend you have in the area or sure, the fly shop maybe you might have some resources through a local fly shop. But I think what you'll get at a local fly shop is pretty generic knowledge that you could probably find online if you wanted to anyway. And I think I don't see that beating out my confidence patterns in terms of my own confidence in them, or even in terms of, I mean, my confidence patterns are not very specific mayfly, dry flies, you know, they're generalists. And so I feel like they have some universal appeal.
It's funny, having worked in a fly shop, my recommendations would often just be my confidence flies. So, and a lot of my answers would always be the same because I think a lot of trout behave similar, and even in Montana or anywhere out west in Wyoming, our flies from Pennsylvania will produce wonderfully over there because they're so generic often, which we've talked about. If we were really getting in the nitty-gritty details of species specific or things like that, maybe you'd vary a little bit more, but our style of fishing, I feel like, lends itself to a little bit more flexibility in terms of regionality.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably different if you're going into a place that has a pretty predominant hatch of a very specific insect, and you want to match that pretty well. Then it's great to just go in and get the flies that are going to match that have been tried and true over the years for that hatch in particular. But if you're going and planning on going in and nymphing or streamer fishing or something like that, or fishing general hatches, I don't know that it makes any difference at all.
I think about 80% of the time you can get away with generic patterns, and you may catch 80% of the fish, but you're going to hit situations. I don't know. Let's say you showed up at Central PA and the cicadas were hatching and you didn't know it, and you showed up and you tried to fish hare's ear. You'd be in for, the disappointment of the day not having one of those flies. So like, I think, you're safe most times, but unless there's like something major going on, like a hatch or something that you don't know, that you're not aware of, is where you might miss out.
I agree with that. There's a couple
flies aren't crap.
As long as your flies aren't crap, is that what you said?
Yeah. if your confidence flies are no good, then
that's true. Why do you have confidence in those anyway?
Yeah.
Downsize it. Well, I mean, most of what a trout eats is small and brown / olive,
brown.
Right? I mean, that's across the world. That's if we're talking about nymphs, and that's really what they eat most. And then I think what bait fish is really in your water matters. If you're fishing streamers, I think that matters. That's something to understand.
Agree.
We talked about the White River not too long ago, and a couple podcasts ago. We were talking about the White River. Well, you might want to know what those trout are being fed.
Yeah,
Bill, where are they getting fed?
Point.
Rainbow trout, and that was our best pattern when we were there.
Right?
There you go.
So you match the hatch. Yep.
Yeah, we tried to nymph and didn't work out that great. But
and the other thing I'd say is, well, even around here, like green was really good all the way through early fall. And I don't know, it's been, I'm not quite, we finally got some rain and I'm not sure, but I think green might be done, which it should have been. Well, just thinking about the way it's been in the last many, many years, green is usually done middle of October, but it really went all the way through early November. So today and yesterday I was out and not much response on that green. But we'll see. We'll see. But that's something you could easily miss if you were just fishing your confidence flies. No matter where you go, you just always fish, your pheasant tails and your hare's ear kind of things. There's a reason why the pheasant tail and the hare's ear works everywhere. Again, it looks like so many of the nymph patterns that they eat. Just like an Adams or I don't know what, an elk hair caddis, anything else? What am I missing? A woolly bugger underneath for a streamer.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good strategy, and I think I'd much rather fish my confidence flies to start, like Trevor said, than to be trying to develop some confidence with some guy from a fly shop. That's great stuff. I mean, it could be a fly shop or a local guide or just, a buddy or a friend's friend. You get some local knowledge. I'm absolutely going to try those patterns out, but I'm probably going to start with what I know I fish best in the first place.
Yeah.
Whether it's after a fishing trip or at a backyard fire, you can bet the Troutbitten crew has a case of New Trail Broken Heels along with us. It's honestly our favorite beer. This hazy IPA is smooth and full-bodied. Hand-selected Citra hops lead to notes of bright clementine and juicy ruby red grapefruit. Broken Heels is a keeper. New Trail beer is proudly brewed in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, and delivered cold to your favorite craft beer retailer every week. At New Trail, it's not about being the best angler. It's about getting out there. So enjoy nature's moments and reward yourself for a day well fished with New Trail Broken Heels. It's Troutbitten's favorite beer. Precision Fly and Tackle is a family-owned business with a passion for the outdoors and a sense of adventure. They are anglers who enjoy every moment spent on the water with family and friends. Precision Fly and Tackle carries the widest selection of Euro rods, reels, lines, leaders, flies, and accessories. From the beginner to the advanced angler, Precision Fly and Tackle can outfit every angler, no matter the budget. Visit them online at precisionflyandtackle.com. Then use code Troutbitten10, that's the number 10, for 10% off your order. Gear up with Precision Fly and Tackle for your next adventure. Hey, let's do one more question. Josh, will you read this one?
This question comes from James Whittle through Instagram. Guys, I know you've talked about being efficient on the water. I like the whole versatility concept, but how much gear do you need to make all that happen? Do I really want to carry all of that while I'm waiting? It seems like a little too much.
I still think you can be versatile and not carry a lot of gear.
Yeah.
Don't get tied up in the, I have to have all these things. Think about versatility as a strategy and how you're casting, how you're presenting the flies.
Nice.
I don't know. Let's say I want to be versatile and I want to nymph fish. And so I can nymph fish with an indicator or I can tight line. The indicator's, just a small little plastic thing you're carrying along. And so it's not a big thing to carry along, but it can make a big difference in how you're presenting the fly and be versatile.
Yeah, I think you can fit a ton of versatility into a small package. Like as long as you've got what you need to fish heavy and to fish light.
Josh is an expert on that.
She said.
Jeez.
What's that? What happened? I missed
Get out of here. Get out of here.
Is that what Kelsey saw? In you?
Oh, no.
Yeah. Get out of here. All right.
You get out of here.
You get out of here.
That took
a wrong turn.
a second. Sorry. I saw like your eyes, Austin. I'm like, wait, hold on. What happened?
What did I just say?
What did I just say?
You get out of here.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, so read that back.
So as long as you've got what it takes to present something large or small, to present something heavy or light.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
You guys.
Every man
It's
is
more how
different.
you use it. Not
I think your mama's
how
been
large
telling
you are.
stories.
Call my wife in here to vouch for me.
4 kids. I think you got all the vouching you need.
That's true.
Yeah.
The swimmers, but that has nothing to do with size. Anyway.
Anybody else have a good answer to this question?
I think this is where the monorig shines, is people that like us all who have desired to fish and meet trout on their level and not make them meet you in the technique that you want to choose, and yet want to do it without carrying 3 rods, right?
Right.
You can carry 3 or 4 different leaders even, and whether that be lightness leader, you can carry a dry fly leader and cast it on a monorig at short distance to mid distance, and you can, I think for all of us, huge part of the reason we fish the monorig is that we've found it to be elegant in its simplicity and yet effective in its application, right? So
That's
nice. I
nice.
think your question is great, but it's also exactly what we're doing. We are minimizing gear while maximizing the versatility.
Well, Josh and I just filmed a video that focuses on the tight line advantage to 4 different styles: tight line nymphing, tight line to the streamer, tight line to the indicator, and tight line to dry dropper. We all do this with 1 leader. And it's not a compromise. It's not like, oh, we're just trying to make 1 leader kind of do a bunch. No, there is no compromise. There's no downside to it. And we use this 1 leader that does a lot of different things just by changing minimal things. And Bill, you said something, your first answer kind of stuck out to me there, that just because we're being versatile doesn't mean that we're carrying a lot of gear. And I'm with Trevor there. I'm not carrying more than 1 rod on the river. And I know, I acknowledge I probably have a little more gear than the average person, probably more than all of you. I like a lot of stuff in my vest, but I still consider myself a minimalist. I really do. And I like to keep things as simple as possible. And every time that my vest gets completely wet from a drenching rain, I got to dry it all out. And every time I put all that stuff on the dining room table with a towel underneath it. I look at it and I go, I don't need that. I don't need that. I don't know how that made it into my vest, and that's staying out of there. And I really do. And I carry one nymph box, one streamer box. Well, 2 smaller dry fly boxes, and there's wet flies in my streamer, in my nymph box. So I don't have that many flies. I have more leaders than anything, and there's different kinds of weight configurations. If I'm fishing underneath, that matters to me.
So I'm going to combine question 1 and question 2.
Oh, cool.
And say most times that I fish, starting now, is I know there's not going to be a lot of dry fly activity for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
I will fish out of a lanyard and maybe have 30 or 40 confidence flies with me, and I can just fish them different ways. I have my confidence flies that I need, but then I'm also not weighted down by things, all the other gear. Sometimes I find myself, when I do bring more gear, I start to run through other ideas of like, well, maybe I should switch. And then I spend half of the morning switching out different routines instead of just focusing on presentation and trying to change the way I'm doing things.
That's fair. Just fish what you have on and fish it better.
Yeah.
Especially this time of year as it starts to get real cold. I don't want to change stuff as much.
Yeah.
So I end up making less changes for sure.
Well, yeah. And as the seasons get more, let's say, extreme, you know what they're going to eat. And that happens in the summertime, and that happens as we approach wintertime, and then all through the winter. So it does simplify things. All right, that's good stuff. Thank you for those questions, everybody. Keep them coming. And I think real soon we're going to do a full podcast of just listener questions and sort of free form, see where it goes.
We'll probably only get through 4 of them.
We might get through 4 of them.
Yeah.
And then we'll be done. That's fair. All right, so let's get to our topic, though, tonight and start thinking about why the streamer head position is the key to a good presentation.
Okay, I'm thinking.
You think about it, Bill. Willie. I mean, I think this is true, unless you're dead drifting it, right? The head position of the streamer really matters. If you're letting the current carry the streamer along and tumble downstream without tension, then you're not going to be in control of or even care about that head position if you're dead drifting your streamer. But I don't think we do that very much. But let me point this out. I think one of the reasons everyone loves streamer fishing is because we spend so much time dead drifting bugs, because that's what trout eat. The streamer fishing is a relief. It's fun. It's different, and it just opens up things and allows us to start moving our fly. And sometimes we can even see it. We can see the effects of our line hand and our rod hand, and that's just a lot of fun. Right, guys? Hey, do you guys dead drift your streamers very much? Start with that.
I don't dead drift them. I pause them frequently and long.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily dead drift them.
That's a good point. If you cast it upstream and it's coming back to you, it's not necessarily a dead drift, right? I mean, we work all the time on getting perfect dead drifts with a nymph and a dry fly, and that's very difficult. The perfect dead drift is unaltered by the current almost at all.
Yeah,
and,
it's pretty rare that I don't animate a little bit, and one of my favorite presentations for a streamer is casting upstream and letting it achieve its position in the strike zone, but then animating it slightly as it drifts back towards me. But it's not a true dead drift, I am twitching the head or kind of manipulating it out of the current seam that it started in.
That's nice.
Maybe the closest thing I think I come to doing it is with a jig head, and where I'm trying to keep it in one seam and one speed.
Sure. And I think let's talk about the weights a little and how we weight the streamers and how that changes the head position. Let me ask you this, Bill. When you are doing what you just described, are you aware of the head position, of the head of the streamer? Do you think about that?
Not frequently do I think about it. I'm more thinking about the body position. And
tell me.
But I guess that correlates to where the head is pointed. I almost think of like if I know where a fish is sitting, or I think I know where a fish is sitting, whether it's on structure or near structure, my first thought is to just slow the fly down in that area and then change the head position or the orientation of the fly. And maybe because, if a fish is dying, it's going to kick and it's going to kind of like roll, and it's going to kind of, when you change the head position and it pauses, it's almost like the head position gets changed. It's hanging there. It looks like the fish is kind of dying and almost in free fall. And I feel like that's what will often trigger a strike.
Yeah.
And so if you can plan that around structure, I think that's often very predictable to get a fish to eat it.
Yeah, I was going to say something pretty similar. Like I have a very small streamer that's a major, I go to it all the time. One of my favorite ways of fishing it is to absolutely start with a very dead drift style approach where I'm casting up and like we've talked about before, a couple rod lengths up and one over, like a very, very nymph-like approach. And then I'm going to nymph it down and sort of exactly like what Bill was talking about. As soon as it gets near where I think the fish are, and usually that's structure, usually that's a rock or something. Yeah. That's when I give it just a little bit of life. And all that, and you kind of mentioned it, you use different words, but like the stall that happens as soon as you give tension to it in any direction other than just letting it dead drift. And so it's almost like I'm letting it have a supernatural look with nothing distracting about it at all. And as soon as it gets to where I think this is where there should be a take, this is where there should be a fish, I'm going to give it enough animation just to get it to stall out for a second or change direction, something to try to initiate a response and to give it that bait fish look. And then a lot of times that's like you're doing it where you think the fish is. And so you're already upping your chances there. And it works really well.
I kind of do something a little opposite. I'll actively fish it. We talk about casting far up ahead and retrieving the fly till it's sort of close to ourselves. I'll actively fish that fly and change seams and change speeds and depths until it gets within a regular tight line distance. And then I'll remove all the slack off the water. I'll go tight to that fly and then I'll kill it and kind of jig it through and slightly twitch it through those areas. Oftentimes I don't let the fly swing very far down below me. I don't like when they drag up towards the surface. I don't really like to see the streamer at all, actually. So once it gets just below me, I pick it up and recast and keep moving upstream.
Yeah, that is a different sort of look. Animating it and then pausing it around the structure.
Interesting.
You know what? You mentioned something that you don't like, the way it kind of, as it tails out, as it swings down below you, it kind of comes up to the surface very naturally just because of the amount of tension that's on it.
Right.
One of the things that, maybe not if it's right below you, but as it's starting to swing and as it's kind of coming up through the water column, I like to add a bunch of slack in that moment and get it to sort of, it's like slowly rising. And then it's just doing that thing where you just force it to stall because all of a sudden the current can take it and it can sink again. And then as soon as you gain contact again, that's been a hot spot for me.
And its head would be facing upstream. It would be transitioning from a downstream approach to an upstream. Do you do that night too?
Exactly.
That sounds like a night thing.
Yeah, I'm saying no.
I have thrown in slack like on in situations like that at night. I'm not sure that it's been quite
not as much, or
not as intentional right there. Like
good point.
At that,
what we're talking about is giving the trout a chance to eat it. I think that's what we're all kind of saying. We just might do it at different points in the presentation. Of course, it's all situational. That's what I like to think is giving the trout a chance to eat it. We talk about trying to get trout to be predators and come chase it. That's great. When they're in that mood, that's fantastic. There might be nothing more fun. But I like to give them a chance to eat it, to take it to them, to make it an easy meal, to make it look like it's dying or vulnerable. How many bait fish do trout see during a day? Just one day. I don't know.
Thousands.
I don't know. Maybe thousands. But at least 50 or 100, right? Depends on where they're sitting. Definitely depends on where they're sitting. But they're not eating all of them. And I think they want to clean up the system. If they see something that, like Josh says, is holding its head in the current and then all of a sudden it dies and just starts to go down, well, hopefully a big old trout just takes his opportunity right there.
Dom, you read about something, I feel like it was in one of your night articles about the dead drift or death drift.
Death drift.
How you fished the rogue, kind of that original just subsurface pattern. And that's a technique that I've had success with in the daytime as well.
Nice.
particularly in muddier. I've used that technique in muddier water,
Right.
Around structure, around close to the bank. And I think, the way at least I've employed it, I don't know if it's exactly how you do it, but casting upstream and then having almost a neutrally buoyant fly, but just kind of letting it sink just below and then kind of twitching it back up, and kind of that same concept that Josh is talking about of a fish that's sort of barely holding on to its ability to establish itself in the current, trying its best and then kind of failing, trying and then failing. Just a position of vulnerability.
That's neat. I've felt the same, or I've kind of found the same thing. It works for me at night, and then it works for me best when the water is colored up.
Yeah.
I can't seem to get it going under, regular water conditions. But no, I use that death drift when it is muddy or really dirty. And boy, the hits on that are just crushing, right?
Yep.
So for me, I'm always thinking about that. I'm always looking at that head position. And all the animations that I do, what I'm doing really is manipulating the head of the fly. And even Bill, as you were talking about, what you're going to do with the fly to the body of the fly. I think it starts with the head and which way the head is going to go.
For sure. And you guys were talking about your stinky bass and even like muskie and stuff. And one thing I've noticed, like streamer fishing for those different species, bass and pike and muskie, it's almost like their mouth can be a vacuum if they want it to be. Like they open it and they flare their gills and it will suck the prey in.
Yeah, it does.
But I've never seen a trout do that. And so the trout seem to always strike the bait fish, whether it be strike it and then spin it around and then eat it head first. Because if they're eating a sculpin, they can't eat it backwards, or like the sculpin will flare its gills and, they won't be able to swallow the fish. And so to be able to swallow that sculpin, to your point, like the head has to be positioned going down into the mouth of the sculpin has to be the first thing entering the trout's mouth to be able to eat it safely.
Yeah. If that bait fish is, I'm going to say 2 inches, maybe 2.5 inches or better, that seems to be the size where they really will eat the head first. And I kind of understood that first from Gallup. And Gallup says they always eat the head first. And they certainly don't always eat the head first. On those bigger food forums, they sure seem to. And you can kind of see it. And I know it's like, especially from a boat, we can see a lot. But even then, things happen so fast, you can hardly tell. You're like, oh man, he hit it, but he didn't eat it. Bill, you make an excellent point there. Trout are different. They don't have that big wide mouth of a large mouth bass. Boy, not even like a smallmouth bass. They kind of attack differently than a bass. They don't just let all that.
Yeah,
that's neat. That's a good point. For over a decade, Smith Creek has provided innovative, high-quality fly fishing accessories designed to put your gear in easy reach, free up your hands, and keep our waters clean. This November, Smith Creek is releasing 2 new products just in time for the holidays. Check their website to see the new tippet holder. Each unit is individually machined from high-quality billet aluminum and anodized in one of 2 eye-catching colors. They hold up to 5 tippet spools with a patented, spring-loaded plunger design that is easy to load and keeps your spools right where you need them. All Smith Creek products are built guide tough and backed by solid customer service. To learn more about Smith Creek products, visit their website at smithcreek.co. As fly anglers and tyers, we understand the value of having the right tool for the job. AvidMax.com offers over 20,000 products and the knowledge to help find the right tools for your job, whether that be at the tying bench or on the water. Listeners of the Troutbitten podcast receive a discount at AvidMax.com. Enter the code TROUT10, that's the number 10, at checkout to save 10% on your order. Orders over $25 ship for free, so you can put more gas in your tank or beer in your cooler. For all things fly fishing and tying, elevate your game with AvidMax.
We were talking about like stalling the fly and so on. And so a lot of times I may carry 3 or 4 streamers, but they're all weighted differently because depending on the time of year and depending on the amount of current and, speed that's out there as far as like the height of the river, I feel like that to me always matters more than necessarily the size or the color. Like I want something that I can, when I stall it out, I don't want it to just directly drop to the bottom most days.
Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, well, how we incorporate weight. And I mean, if you're fishing under the water, we talked about this a few podcasts ago. As soon as you go under the water, you're going to need weight. And where's that weight going to be? It could be in a split shot, 10 inches above the streamer, 20 inches above the streamer, I don't know. Or it could be directly in the streamer itself. And what you're saying there, Bill, is like you vary things day to day. You're finding success in where that weight is, how much weight there is, and then because that weight very much dictates how you can move the fly and what the fly wants to do in and of itself.
Yeah, I found myself about 2 or 3 falls ago.
Yeah.
I spent the entire day throwing streamers, and I think I caught like 2 fish, 3 fish.
You stuck with it, though.
And I stuck with it because I had so many fish follow. I mean, like 50 to 70 fish like would follow and look at it. And I was like, I'm going to figure them out. And it never happened.
There's interest.
But like the next day I was like, okay, well, yesterday I fished I fished kind of like the headbanger type fly. And I was like, okay, I need to take a minute and think about like, what was I doing? And the river was very low. And to fish that headbanger and heavier fly, I had to strip it very fast to keep it off the bottom. And so I didn't have the ability to pause it, because if I paused it, it would just immediately sink and hang up on the bottom.
Yeah.
And so like the next day I was like, okay, I'm going to go out, I'm going to fish the same style of fly, but I'm going to fish it a much lighter version of it and give me the ability to stall it. And like that next day I had better success. And so I was like, okay, now I know. And it, it could have been that the pressure changed, the fish were eating better that day, but like in my head I was like, oh, I went back to camp and sat there and sat in my sorrow and had a few beers and thought, what did I do wrong, and what can I do better the next day?
Sure, because 50 or 70 hits is really going to frustrate you when you only get 2 hookups. Yeah. And those 2 hookups are probably they feel like an accident, right? You didn't really figure something out.
Bill, you raised a good point about weight and conditions regarding retrieves and presentations that are available to you based on the weight of the fly you're fishing. And it's important to remember that weight is all has to do with the context that it's based in. So you could be fishing a headbanger fly and be in a boat and the river is ripping, and that fly that used to drop to the bottom really fast yesterday in that low clear water doesn't do that anymore. And so when we talk about how heavy things are, it's not necessarily like this thing's really heavy, this thing's not very heavy. It all has to do with the hard flow or the depth that you're trying to reach. So, Bill, what you did there of manipulating the weight of your fly, or even the build of the fly, is a really good idea. I like that a lot.
And to your point, I thought you were going to say this, but sometimes it comes down to the aerodynamics of your fly. Because I do know that headbanger sculpin at some point when the water gets high, it doesn't have enough weight to sink, and it's not as aerodynamic, and it does have kind of a little bit of a hover.
Yeah, it's got some resistance
has
there.
A little bit of a hover.
Yeah.
Versus if you put like a 4.5 millimeter tungsten bead on there, it just it'll cut straight to the current, where that will just kind of
that's interesting.
Ride the waves, so to speak.
Right.
Or ride the seam.
That's not a bad description at all. That's exactly, I think, what that headbanger, and many other flies that have those kind of materials will do. It rides the wave, and if the wave is heavy enough, it doesn't really want to sink. But if you take, a very streamlined fly, like we use a craft fur jig a lot, right, or craft fur streamer. If I put that on a jig hook, it could be a bead or it could be a lead ball jig. That craft fur hardly has any resistance, and that fly will just cut through the seam, cut through the depth in a way that headbanger never will. It could be equal weight. Hell, it could be twice the amount of weight on that headbanger, and the craft fur jig will still cut way faster than the headbanger. It doesn't ride the wave, as you say.
Yep.
Yeah. It's a neat thing.
And there's a lot of different materials that affect Like some soak in the water. Like there's so many different ways. Like a woolly bugger, and like most streamers are tied with like hackle bodies, and those hackle bodies are the same thing. They don't necessarily just immediately sink to the bottom. They have resistance.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing about the jig hooks, and so I'll tie again. I'll go back to this craft fur jig. Sometimes we call it a CF streamer because CF sounds more sophisticated than craft fur. Anyway,
That's what matters.
That's what matters. You have to sound elitist.
Acronyms. That's what we're all about.
We're going for elitism.
Yep.
Yeah, and acronyms. Anyway, I tie it in 3 different versions. And let's just say that let's compare the actual jig head, the ball jig version. That guy, the fly will rock head down, head up. And I will use that when I absolutely do want to jig it. I will give the fly some grace to fall. And once I get to the bottom, I'll jig it back up. Then the head comes up. And here I am to the head position again, right? The head is literally coming up, following to my rod tip, and now I drop it. So a jig fly tied like that on this craft fur jig will go up and down and up, and the head really rocks up and down.
Yeah.
But if I put the same design of fly and simply change the weight, like you were saying, Bill, simply change where the weight is positioned, I could use the same amount of weight. But if it's not a jig hook and that weight is not positioned in that jig position, that fly, absolutely, it'll go a little bit head down. It kind of goes head down.
It won't rock as hard.
There you go. It doesn't. And I'll use that to affect. Day to day, I might want a different thing to happen. Bill?
So the jigs, and so I started fishing them last year, and so I had a couple days that I switched to a small size 6 single hook jig, and had some really good success. But what I'm curious to know if you guys have the same thing, is almost all of my hits fishing jig hooks are on the fall.
Oh yeah,
I rarely ever catch a fish when I'm like on the jig back up, or even like the peak of the you jigged it up to the utmost point and then you're letting it fall again. Almost all of those eats seem to be on the fall.
I think that's the same concept sort of as like the pause or the super pause you talk about. Even if I fish a non-jigged fly, if we're kind of twitching it back to ourselves and we pause it or kill it out, that's when I get most of my eats, not necessarily when I'm being the most aggressive or brash.
Yeah.
I think a big part of that is probably just because it is the most natural movement, right? I mean, because we're not really feeling the weight of that current because we have a rod and a line in between us. And when it actually switches and that head turns and it drops, it's doing what is completely natural for anything with resistance to do in that current. And so it's the most natural look that we can possibly get, is just when it's falling. And
I also think I think you're right 100%. And I think the simple explanation is also brown trout are efficient creatures who don't want to expend extra effort when possible. Right. And I mean, when my 3-year-old is running around my house like crazy and I'm trying to catch him, I don't chase him all around the house. I wait till he stops and I grab him,
because you're educated.
Because I'm educated, but because
So
I don't want to throw my back out reaching for my 3-year-old, chasing him around the house. But I think there's some answers, and the fish are animals, just like you and I see in the whitetail woods. Deer will do any random thing on any given day, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. But for the majority of their time, and I think for brown trout, for that 80% of their time, they're trying to be efficient and they're trying to save energy. And so they will take that fly at its most vulnerable point when they can expend the least amount of energy to do it. And yeah, sure, they'll chase it once in a while, right?
Yeah, at its most vulnerable.
Yeah.
And the bigger fish are the smarter fish, and they're probably going to exude the least amount of energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And whereas I think many anglers these days think like, those big fish, they're the ones that are going to get up and chase and be predators. Well, okay. On a good day. On kind of an exceptional day, sure. But I'm with you, Bill. I think the bigger fish are the ones that are going, you know what? I'm not chasing that around. You bring it
like
to
Trevor.
They're like, Trevor, I'm not chasing my 3-year-old. I'm waiting for my moment of opportunity, and then I'm going to get them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so too. And
Yeah.
Austin, you're saying that on the jig, when it's falling, okay, when you're using a jig presentation, when it's falling, that's the vulnerable point.
Yeah. Yep.
They almost always eat on the paws, or if you're stripping in between strips, on a jig, it's as it's falling.
Somewhat predictable too to the trout, especially if they've watched it for 1 or 2 jigs and they know the next motion coming and they've kind of seen that that's the time to strike, then they'll go ahead and do that.
That's neat. That's a good point. You talk about the timing or the rhythm of things of a presentation.
Yeah, just not be too
That's pretty
sporadic.
good.
Yeah.
That is pretty good. I've found that to be especially important here in lower and clearer water like we've had in the fall. The more erratic I made things, the fewer fish I was catching. I was actually spooking fish on erratic presentations. The more predictable I made it, rhythmic, let's say, they were eating it, in between strips, in between jerks and twitches and whatever, in between animations. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
But that's neat. I don't know if I've thought about that too much, but I like that.
Do you guys think that there is any difference in just how natural it looks when we are manipulating the movement and when we're just letting it fall? Because like I mentioned a second ago, like who's to say that us giving a little bit of action looks like what a bait fish looks like when it exerts some energy. But when that bait fish lets itself go limp, the natural thing is for it to just stall out and either sink or just hang there in the water, depending on the density of the fly that we're fishing. Wouldn't it make most sense that is the most natural of a presentation that you're going to get is when you stop manipulating it for a second?
Yeah.
Am I thinking about that wrong?
No, I think you're thinking about it. It's like, I think it's a combination of what you're saying is it's naturally vulnerable at that point.
Yeah.
Like a bait fish is going to look the same way where, if you strip and then you let it pause and you let the current kind of catch your fly and the current is going to manipulate your fly just as if it would manipulate a bait fish.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we want to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Now, we say bait fish, but I mean, sculpins, for example, don't have an air bladder. So they kind of go head down. And then they might move around, and then they go head down again. And I mean, sometimes I'll think, I'm going to try to look like a sculpin. And I think it matters. And a crayfish moves quite a bit differently than a sculpin. And boy, a black-nosed dace, for example, which we have plenty around here, they're much more, athletic than a sculpin. And there are times where I'm like thinking, all right, I'm going to try to look like a black-nosed dace. I think trout eat a lot fewer black-nosed dace than they do crayfish. I think crayfish are the slowest and possibly the easiest to capture. I think sculpins maybe next in line there. Most predictable in their behaviors, and yet a nice big protein form for them.
Yeah. Do you think this, I don't fish a lot of crayfish streamers.
I think they almost all look like crayfish, to be honest.
But I think the jig streamers,
what you do with it,
I think looks a lot like the crayfish.
Yeah.
Than if you're swimming something, at 1.5 feet under the surface.
We see a lot of crayfish at night, right, guys? I mean, you throw your headlamp on when you're relocating, and that's when I really learned what crayfish really do. And yeah, they'll rise and fall like a jig, but not extreme either, I would say. But they do a lot of almost swimming. They can swim, I'm going to say 5 to 6 feet in one pulse. And then they kind of drop and get their energy and do it again. I don't know. I would say almost every streamer in my box, I feel like I can get it to look like a crayfish and then maybe look like a sculpin. And if I move it the right way, I think it can look like a black-nosed dace. I think it's how we move it. We said that earlier. It's the way we move the fly that sells it.
And I think it pays to take the time to observe those different bait fish. And, for guys listening from around the country, look into the bait fish that are living in your rivers. Crayfish are probably pretty ubiquitous for most of us. But if you can at least study the types of life forms living in your stream and try to mimic them, there's definitely some success to be had there.
For sure. Let me ask you this, guys. What head position, as you're casting, for me, I'm always thinking about that head position because that dictates how the fly is going to swim. What head position, sells most for you? What puts the most fish in the net?
So if I'm throwing it upstream, I would think the most time I frequently get the fish to eat it is if I have the head. So usually it's strip it off the bank and then I flip it, and the head is positioned upstream, and so the body of the fly is kind of showing a bigger profile towards the fish.
Now, you've mentioned that before, Bill. Are you talking about a bigger profile to fish looking up or a bigger profile to fish approaching it?
Right. We did cover this before.
Approaching it.
Yeah.
Let's say it's the bank and there's a rock on the bank. I would throw, let's say, at a 45 above the rock, and then in front of the rock, I'm stripping it full profile. So the head is pointed at me. There's a, the top part of the rock, the head is pointed at me. And then when it comes to the other side of the rock, I'm going to switch it and give that head position now to point upstream. And then the front side of the rock gets the broadside of the fly, so to speak.
So you're talking about a head flip, really. And we've talked about this a bit, and I have a technique that I call a head flip. You're starting with the head. For me, it's as simple as this. Where is the head facing? It's in what you're talking about is you're starting casting up and across, and it's coming. You said then the streamer is coming back to you. So the head is literally faced downstream and across, 45 degrees, let's say, downstream and across, and then you're flipping it around that structure to maybe it'll be upstream and across, or just flat across. Right? Am I right about that?
It may not necessarily be. I guess
if your streamer had eyes, where is it looking?
There you go.
If it had a flashlight out of the front of its nose, where's your flashlight pointing?
My most productive is when the flashlight is pointing upstream.
No, it's not. We're not on the same page.
Like where your fly is like swim
upstream for a moment.
For a moment,
yes, for a moment though.
And
like,
then
I'm not saying like it's permanently staying there.
Right.
I guess like it's hard to explain.
It's the head flip.
Yeah.
Yeah, we acknowledge that. Like the head flip's a great intermediary. It's a great trigger, and then you flip it back a lot of times. But if you're saying like your most productive head position is up and across, looking up and across, then you'd be swinging flies the whole time.
Yeah, they'd all be below you.
I guess what I'm saying is most of my eats come on the flip where so like the eyes are pointed at me, they're coming, and then I'm rotating the fly, and so the eyes are facing upstream
for a moment.
And at that point, I feel like I get like 70 to 80% of my strikes when you change that profile right there.
So like before that double flip.
Right. No, I'm with you.
Right.
That to me that's my best trigger. It's what we call a head flip. So once again, we're talking about, I like this, the eyes, the headlight there. That's good, Trevor.
Yeah.
Right? So it's the eyes are faced down and across. They're looking down and across, literally, and maybe a round structure. You flip the head, and if you're on a tight line, you can just take the rod over upstream, or you could mend if you're doing a different system, and you somehow get that head now to face so it's looking upstream and maybe up and across. And I'm with you, Bill. That's a great trigger for me. I do a double flip like Josh just said. I'll often flip it and then flip it right back. That's my number one trigger, is that head flip. And once again, it's a manipulation of the head position, which once again I think looks like that vulnerable state. It's like the streamer is trying to do something. This bait fish that we're trying to imitate is maybe trying to right itself in the current, and then it doesn't have the energy. It just looks available to the trout all of a sudden.
If it's structure that I know that I have confidence in a fish being at, when I flip it, like when I do that head flip, I'm pausing it sometimes for up to like 3 or 4 seconds.
Sure.
Like I'm letting it sit there and being like, hey, I'm an easy meal, come eat me.
Love it.
Let me ask you guys this. When it flips, on average, are you guys seeing this fly? Is it 8 inches below the surface, and when you flip it, it rides up towards the surface? Or are you flipping it and able to stay like riding towards the bottom? Because I don't do well on that retrieve, and I always feel like it's because when I force the flip, it makes the fly rise up off the bottom and look weird, and then I have to manually flip it back, and it just never feels smooth enough to feel productive to me.
I'm probably a foot to 2 feet under the surface, and I'm fishing visual flies that I can see.
So when you flip it, does it rise up significantly or does it stay where it's at in the column?
Depends on the speed of the current and the weight of the fly.
You can manipulate it.
Yeah. Say a walking speed.
I don't see it rise up. I think it's more of like it stays in position of where it was at.
I feel like we're in control of that, especially on the monorig. Now, if you have line on the water, then you're very much at the mercy of what that line is going to do. And you can only mend and control all of that so much. Josh, you were going to say something.
Well, Bill kind of covered it. It's, I'm generally fishing more visible flies. And I know we've talked about this before, Austin. Like you really do like to keep it pretty low and pretty slow in general, right? And so that changes things a little bit because, I mean, maybe that means that you're dealing with a little bit more head weight or something like that. But I think it's also just in the timing. Like if you just like pull it and you keep tension that whole time on that head flip, then the head's going to come up and it's going to rise up and through the water column. But if you give it slack, lift your rod up and over and then pull it in the opposite direction, it's not going to rise up. It just changes directions and stalls. And so it's all just about, it's about manipulating that slack with it.
It makes sense.
You don't want to keep tension on the fly the entire time through that head flip, because if you do that, it will rise up through the water column.
Yeah. You're almost waiting for the fly to catch up with what
point.
you've done with the rod tip.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot. Well, I mean, what we're trying to do here is really think about the head position of the streamer. And like Bill, you kind of threw me for a loop there in what you're saying, but now I think we're all on the same page. You're talking about manipulating that head position through the drift. The way that, I mean, I kind of fish streamers like everybody else. I learned to have my head position faced up or up and across because I was swinging streamers. Swinging to me is where you're using the current. The current's pulling against your fly. And so Trevor's awesome. You know, where are the eyes looking, or if it had a flashlight on its head, it would be faced up and across. Anyway, so I'd swing flies. And then I read Gallup's book, and that changed everything. I think it's 2002, somewhere around there. Gallup's modern streamers for trophy trout. And like a lot of people, that really changed the way that I looked at streamers. And I started saying, okay, I'm going to learn this jerk strip. His idea, and this is fair to say, this is it. His idea is to hit the banks, hit the structure. Let's just say the bank. Put it on the bank, cast across or slightly up and across. Put it on the bank. That head position is immediately going to face either across or, let's say, 45 degrees down and across. Counter really to the swinging streamers thing, which was so common before. And then he says, if it's a bait fish, if we're really trying to look like a bait fish that is escaping or fleeing, and we're trying to elicit that predatory instinct of those trout that are hanging on the bank, then we want to look like a bait fish that is going to escape. And when a bait fish is going to escape, it's not going to fight the current. It's not going to go up and across and into the current. It's going to use the current to its advantage, like any creature. And how do I say it? Like anything
in nature.
Anything in nature. Thank you. It's going to use the current to its advantage, and it's going to go downstream or down and across. And the whole jerk strip concept, which is a Gallup, I don't know, it's where I learned it. The jerk strip is to pulse it from that bank, from the structure, down and across, and it'll go and it'll pause, and it'll go and it'll pause, and it'll go and it'll pause. But as it's going, it's almost always going down and across. And I had really tremendous success with that at first. I get a lot more eats when that head is faced down and across. Now, I say tremendous. It depends. Let's back that off a little bit. It depends on, so many things, but especially the size of the streamer and whatnot. You can't ask too much of the trout. It depends on how fast, how erratic too you're moving it, how jerky everything is, how smooth it is, whatever, how fast you're moving it. There are a lot more elements. But that down and across head position is what gets me the most eats. And then I'll flip it, like you said, Bill. I do think it looks the most natural, too. For a bait fish, I think that is trying to escape. That's very fair. And maybe a bait fish that's even just trying to relocate out into the center.
So do you guys think, now we're talking about head position, do you guys think, have you had any better or worse success with different materials for the head of your flies? Do you think that matters at all?
Sure.
I think, yeah.
That's how it's going to
depends
swim.
on what you're wanting to do. Yeah. I mean, I like a variety of different, I think each head style has a different good application. This summer I had a lot of, I really just It fell into a groove with kind of a mini dungeon and would apply different split shot when I wanted to do something different with the head. But I liked the buoyant head of the deer hair because it gave me kind of a good amount of flotation kind of as a baseline. And then I was able to manipulate that as I wanted to with split shot. And I had good success doing that depending on what water type I wanted to target. I think you can make so many different streamers work well if you're willing to manipulate the weight a little bit. And I'm not shy to throw some split shot on a streamer. Usually really tight to the streamer is what I do because I don't like to lose contact with the motion of the head.
Yeah.
And if I don't want to create a hinge, so I don't put it 3 or 4 inches away, but I'll slide it right up to the knot if I want to change the buoyancy of the head.
I think obviously the materials make a big difference. I use a deer hair head, on a bunny bullet sculpin that I use. And that does not jig down at all. I mean, it does not go up and down, rock back and forth. It's kind of, I put a little bit of weight in the middle of the body, back end, middle of the body. It kind of rides flat and then slightly head down. And like Trevor's saying, I'll throw a split shot, 10 inches, 12 inches, even 14 or 16 inches above the streamer. You're going to get that head down look to the sculpin every time you kind of let off the tension, but it's not nearly as dramatic as if, like a cone head or something like that. I like using different materials to get those different effects, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's either going to kind of rock back, head up, head down, head up, head down, or it's just going to want to try to stay stabilized. And there's people who are big believers in all of I kind of like to do it all, but I mean, you're going to have people that are very bought into one way or the other.
I think when it comes to sinking lines and intermediate lines, I feel like it's a little bit harder to manipulate the head. You're reliant on mending it. You're reliant on, a strip and then the fly kind of kicking to the side one way or another based on how you tied it or designed it.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of times I've gone away, at least for trout, often to fishing the mono rig unless I need to cast really far.
Yeah.
You can still have the same effects with fly line or sinking line.
Yeah.
But it's going to cost you the ability to have contact with the fly because you often have to mend it. And when you mend it, you lose contact with the fly. Yeah. And, when you mend it and the fish eats it and then you're just out of position to kind of set the hook.
Mend it.
I
think all the presentations that we talk about and the things I write about, they can be done with any leader system, any fly line system. But like you said, Bill, you're kind of at a disadvantage when you're trying to actually give that fly some slack and then you have some line on the water and then you need to recover that after they ate it. I would never say that, you have to fish a mono rig to make all this work. No, not at all. But a lot of the head flips and things like that to maintain really great tension and then strike detection, and real true manipulation over the head of that fly, it's hard to beat that mono rig.
I have a really big fish that I missed, when I first got into streamer fishing.
Nice.
And it's just ingrained into my brain that, I threw this big mend in it and the fish ate it. And it was like 2 to 3 seconds before I could, strip set to get the hook into it. And it's just, every time I think about using, fly line and stuff to throw and do some of this stuff, I that fish is just so stuck in my brain of missing it.
Yeah, I hear you. Because when we throw that mend, it gives that streamer a little bit of chance to pause or to not have so much tension on it. And as we already acknowledged, that's when the trout eat a lot. But now all of a sudden we just threw that mend. And then he eats.
And you got to...
Now you got to pick all that up.
You got to catch it up.
And you might not even know it. You might not even know that he ate if he's not in sight,
Yep.
Let me ask you this. To me, this is important. What head angle? Let's break it down this way. What head angle looks like a bait fish that is holding in the current?
Upstream.
Yeah, straight upstream.
Right? We all agree with that?
Yes.
The bait fish breathe or whatever the same way as a trout does. The water has to go in its mouth and out its gills. So it has to face upstream into the current. Not necessarily upstream, but however the current is, into the current, right? And then what head angle looks like a bait fish that is escaping or fleeing or trying to get away?
The fastest possible would be with the current downstream.
Yeah, totally downstream.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, I kind of acknowledged that earlier, and that's Gallup's idea of this jerk strip coming across, down and across, down and across, down and across. And I'd say that if they really want to get away, they probably go straight downstream, like Josh said.
Yeah.
And I do something that I call a speed lead that I think maybe looks like that, like a bait fish that's really trying to get away quickly. What about a head angle that looks like maybe a dying bait fish or one that's in major distress?
I think that's the like down and across, down and like
sideways.
It alternates a little bit, but seems like it's oftentimes trying to reestablish itself upstream, but it's then being caught between that and the power of the current kind of overpowering it. And so it ends up either 45 degrees or even downstream at times, and then it'll right itself and then lose it again.
Unpredictable almost.
Very unbalanced.
Yep.
Almost if it's a long enough streamer in a different direction the rest of its body, like where it's just succumbing to the current.
That's a good point. And I guess the last thing that I think a bait fish does is it might relocate. And if it wants to go upstream or downstream, how do we think it relocates? What does a head position look like when it's relocating?
Last time I was out fishing, I was kind of chasing a sculpin across the stream as I was wading in, and he kept kind of darting to the side, kind of 45 degrees almost, or even further, 60 degrees, and then he'd sort of reestablish himself, and then as he felt my vibration or saw me coming, he'd kind of do the same thing again and again, and he'd drop downstream a little, but then rewrite himself. It was these series of really quick movements, and yet always ended up with him just reestablishing himself in that upstream angle. So, but it was a lot of his movement was to the side, a surprising amount to me. He did drop downstream eventually as he kind of kept getting kicked by me further and further across the stream. But initially, he was really moving laterally, which I found interesting.
Was that just because he was moving away from you?
Yeah, that could be any direction.
Right. Like, that's not unfair, really, for me to say that. Which direction are they relocating, right?
It could just be toward safety, whatever the structure is nearest. Like,
and how fast are they relocating?
They'll swim right to Josh because they know they can't get caught.
oh, that was good.
Oh,
that was nice.
That was really good. That was really good.
Did you think of that beforehand?
Nope.
Are you that quick?
I'm spontaneous like that.
Austin's facing right upstream right now.
I feel all good about myself. And
I like what you were saying there, though, Trevor. Like, you had that experience. You saw the bait fish, the sculpin, moving away from you and doing this and that, moving sideways, moving laterally. And I feel like I have learned the most about bait fish at night because you put the headlamp on and you can really see them. I don't know. There's been plenty of times during the day that you'll see almost a random bait fish doing things. But I've even just sat there at night with my headlamp on, I'm going to say 15 minutes at a time, just sitting there. And I mean, in the shallows, they're just kind of doing their thing. And to me, they are kind of moving upstream or downstream and moving over and moving back. They don't always just hold right there, just waiting for things to come to them. At night, especially, it's like they're kind of roaming. And that's what I mean by relocating. And I would say what I've observed the most, let's say when they're not scared or trying to get away from something or trying to make major movements, I do find that their head is almost always faced, upstream, but they're really low in the current at that point. I never find bait fish just hanging out in the middle of the river. Well, if the current is 4 feet deep, I never find bait fish, just 2 feet up off the riverbed, just hanging out with their head faced upstream. They can't do that, right? So when I do see them with their head faced upstream, it's right on the bottom of the river.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a brown trout actually attack a fish in the water? When I was fishing with a friend and it like exploded out of the water and like on the other side of the bank. And then it just chased this fish the whole way across the bank and beached it literally like 2 feet in front of us.
That's awesome.
And we threw a streamer at the fish and it wouldn't touch it then. Like you would think like he was like, oh, he's going to eat a streamer and this is going to be, easy pickings. But yeah, he had chased this fish the whole way across and like, it was like a crick chub. And he just kind of beached the fish. And
I mean, we see that most from a boat when you can occasionally see them not just chase bait fish, but really chase your streamer. You think they eat the head first mostly, Bill? We touched on this before.
Yeah, I think, or hit the kind of like
Yeah.
I think sometimes they try to stun it and hit it from the side a little bit. I think.
Agreed.
Yeah, and sometimes I think they're just trying to get it out of the area
Mm-hmm.
where they're not really trying to eat it. And I think that's where, yeah, you can spend, like I did, an entire day thinking you can, dial it in, and all you end up with is disappointment.
But then you came back the next day and you made it work.
Yes.
You're so smart.
Sometimes.
Just like Austin. Very quick.
Clever.
Anything else, guys? Head positions.
Yeah. The monorig's hard to beat. It's just a whole level. You can't even compare the
You can't
ability.
even compare.
He's all in
You
on the
can't.
monorig.
You could compare.
He's a
it,
song.
but yeah.
That tight line advantage, what we were just talking about, what we
big
were just
time.
filming today, Josh, right? I mean, that's a big deal. You get to manipulate that head at any moment. Depth, angle, drop rate, speed. It's all right there for you. But
It's
there's
the
other
whole-
ways to do it
It's
too.
the whole package.
The whole package. All right, there it is. We think about the head of the streamer because that's where it starts. Because unless we're dead drifting the fly, then the streamer is traveling somewhere. And like any fish, it has to follow its head. Up, down, over, or across. It's up to us to animate the fly and sell those motions to the trout. Make it look alive and well, or look like a damaged, dying, and available food form. Consistent success comes from understanding how we perform those animations and judging the trout's response. That is the heart of streamer fishing. That's what is different. That's what is fun. And it all starts at the head of the streamer. Thanks again to my friends for a great conversation. We'll be back next week with an episode full of listener questions. So look for that one, episode 9 of season 5 in your Troutbitten podcast feed. Austin, will you read us out?
Remember, the Troutbitten Project is a free resource for all anglers. The website hosts over 900 articles with endless stories, commentaries, tactics, tips, and more. Find what you like through the top menu and through the search page. Navigate by way of the categories and the tags too. Be sure to find the Troutbitten YouTube channel, currently featuring the Troutbitten Tip Series, in collaboration with Wilds Media. These are short, useful, and unique tips for your fly fishing life. Thank you for listening to the Troutbitten Podcast. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment, because it really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.
That little half-second pause.
Hey, Austin, do you have any Mitch Hedberg jokes to share with us?
Yeah, I could tell one.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. This one will be fishing related.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you watch those nature shows and you got the guy fishing and he catches a fish and he lets it go. He don't want to keep the fish, but he doesn't want to make it late for something. Where'd you go? I got caught. Liar, let me see the inside of your lip.
Liar?
That's a good one.
That's Mitch Hedberg,
Fantastic.
the late, great Mitch Hedberg.
He was awesome.